Hello all, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3. And in this particular video, I want to talk to you about why you might actually get a PhD in strategic management. So if you don't know me, I am an associate professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship. And I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out that I want to pay the favor for to help you out. So I created this sharing economy editing platform. Please do go check that out and purchase some credits and actually upload a couple of documents. It does help out with this project. I also have all these YouTube videos and as well, I'm building a blog, so you can check it out at blog.reciprocity.com. All right, so why might you actually get a PhD in any particular field, and particularly within strategic management? So there's a lot of different questions that you might necessarily have in terms of thinking about doing a PhD in sort of a business field like strategic management, for example. There's lots of different reasons about why you might get a PhD, and they're not probably what you'd think that they are in terms of that they'll get you sort of job prospects and all that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm going to be talking about here. But what I am going to be talking about is sort of the biggest reason I think I see people succeed when they do a PhD in any particular field. So the biggest reason that you should be doing a PhD in strategic management is because you're inherently interested in how organizations work, and broadly speaking, in how organizations work within the sort of broader world. Right. So I'm not specifically talking about that you're going to make a bunch of money and, all those different kinds of things. And I'm not specifically talking about strategic management very narrowly in the sense that you are looking at companies and trying to make companies, large corporations make more money. Right. So that is a proportion, or that is a portion of, strategic management that lots of people sort of look at, but it's becoming increasingly smaller in terms of a focus, because the field is getting larger and people are realizing that, corporations do many different things, and there's many different kinds of organizations in the world. Like, it's not just about money, right? So some large corporations actually do really well, and some people study that kind of stuff. But it's really far from the truth in terms of that's the only thing that we focus on. I like to sort of take a very wide view of what strategy is. And it's really, in my personal view, and everybody else has their own personal view and define it in different ways. And I use a textbook definition in my classroom and stuff like that. But really the way that I sort of view strategic management is about the struggle of the manager, right? And I'm saying like not managers like the corporate, the CEO. I'm talking about like people within organizations and the struggle that the manager and the stakeholder goes through to get work done, to sort of get people together to work in a particular group. Maybe it's a manager of 5 different people or a manager of 3 different people, and they get those people together and they get them to work towards some sort of arbitrary goal or something to accomplish a particular thing. Now, it is pretty loosely defined, I know, but it's really difficult to sort of think about what an organization is. So it's not just about corporations. It's really not about making money in any sort of way, but it's more of, thinking about how do you actually achieve your goals and achieve your dreams within your own life. And it's how we sort of view, or how do organizations come together and interact with the world, right? And it's not just looking at financial markets, for example. That's an important part of it, but they interact in many different ways and interact with people that might be protesting with them, right? So there's a whole group of people that are looking at that in terms of how protesters might interact with companies. What's the impact that it has on companies? How do social movements actually form? There's people that look at that kind of stuff, right? Like the world is giant and the world is really, really complicated. And if we just simply say that it's about corporations and Fortune 500 businesses, we're missing the point. So anyways, my point is not, so doing a PhD in strategic management is really about being inherently interested in the problems that managers face and wanting to study them. It's not actually going out and actually doing that kind of stuff. Well, that is going to be a portion of your life as sort of managing the process, the PhD process and stuff. but it's not about you're going to get a PhD in strategic management, or get a PhD in finance, and then you're going to go and work in Wall Street and make all this money stuff and all that. That's not really what it's about. It's really about studying and looking at sort of fundamental science of how organizations actually work, right? So really, in order to do a PhD in strategic management, what you should be thinking about in terms of the job that you're going to be doing, it is an extension of your third grade, right? So imagine, what did we do in third grade? We did reading, writing, and arithmetic. So it's just really a simple extension of that, where you are doing reading. You read a lot, and you read all sorts of stuff and what other people have studied. In fact, it's infinite. It just keeps growing and growing, and that's the hardest part, is knowing to just saying, well, I can't read everything, so I'm going to choose to sort of focus on some things. And then writing is a huge component of what you're going to do. You're going to spend most of your time writing. And then finally, arithmetic, right? So you're going to be doing analytical stuff. So some people might not necessarily do that, but they're going to be doing analytical stuff in some sort of way, right? And that's a really important thing. And then after that, a small portion of what you're going to do is discuss your findings. So it's kind of a secondary thing. And discussing your findings is, you're going to be sort of focused on discussing in conferences in a broader sense, where you're going to be discussing in conferences, but then you're also going to be sort of teaching other, undergraduates and master's students and things like that about strategic management, which is generally a smaller portion of your time in terms of how you should sort of view these things. Now, people go in all sorts of different directions, so I'm not sort of forcing you to think about this is the only way to do it, but this is the way that a lot of people sort of do this path. Is they go and they're doing it for research, and that's really the sort of thing that most PhD programs in any particular field, that's what they're going to be kind of looking for. Is, are you actually going to be interested in doing the research that we are doing? So, a couple of questions. So, are PhD programs free in the United States and Canada? So here's the thing: at most reputable programs in most Western countries, it is basically free, but you might have to pay tuition, but you're going to get some sort of stipend from it. Now, that stipend runs out after a while. So for me, it was 4 years at the school I went to. At other schools, it might be 5 years, and some of them might be 3. But you do get paid. The stipend is really tiny. It's enough that you can eat. You cannot, and you can't get it. It's really low in terms of functioning, and we kind of all know that, and it's really unfortunate. But it's enough. It's not really sustainable in the long run to make that for a life. And so, what the average person sort of stays in the program is, and that's kind of what we call it, a PhD program. So, they'll stay 4 to 7 years and it really varies, but in general, 4 years, if you're trying to get out and, not focus on research so much. 7 years, a lot of people will focus on research so much, but there is sort of fine lines in sort of thinking about this. Some people just take 7 because they just take 7, but some people take 7 to actually invest the time to actually do more research and focus on that. So that's what you're looking at, right? But in general, in this day and age, most programs they're looking at like the 4 to 5 year mark. 4 is really crazy short for most people. And, most people, it's just not kind of sustainable. You can do it. I've seen it done, but, in general, it's kind of at the 5 year mark in terms of what most people are looking for. And that's where the programs are going, and more programs are going towards 5 and 6 years. It's particularly the more well-known programs. So just kind of know that, right? Now, do I think PhD students should get paid more? Yeah, obviously. I think, that's not a really sustainable, that's not sustainable in any sort of way. Now, the thing you have to realize, though, is that a lot of wages in general, and this is what you would actually study if you would do a PhD in strategic management, is that wages are market dependent. So, if so say one school starts, paying a lot more, right? So they start paying. So right now the going rate, I don't know, let's say it's $30,000 a year. So let's say another school decides I'm going to pay everybody $70,000 a year. Well, what ends up happening is that that $70,000 comes from someplace, right? So they start pulling from other different sources at the university to pay that. But the other thing is that it ratchets it up, right? So it goes up from everybody getting, so somebody else has to compete at that particular rate. So there's going to be $70,000. And so they no longer have a competitive advantage. So generally, there is a lot of market forces at play. And then the other thing you also have to think about is that a lot of universities are state dependent. So there's just not a lot of resources for those particular individuals or those particular things, because it's really, it's a risky endeavor to invest in PhDs and PhD research and stuff. And people recognize that. And because there's not an immediate payoff for that. So there's generally a lot less money for that in the long run. And it's just kind of what the sort of marketplace is. And I know it stinks. I'm going to absolutely sympathize with you. It's one of the biggest reasons why, we probably don't have more PhDs and focusing on this particular career, because it's too low. Because it's a sacrifice. But, would I like to change it? Yes. Is there anything that we can do at this moment in terms of doing that? And you can lobby your politicians. So that's all I can say. So, all right. So what about other PhD programs with strategy in its name? So like a PhD in strategic leadership, for example, or a PhD in strategic organization, or a PhD in leadership and strategy, something along those lines, right? So, what you have to look at is that they might be absolutely wonderful programs, and I'm not going to discount anybody else's programs, but what you have to look at is you have to read behind the lines, right? So it's not just the name that's important. It's like institutions, right? So it's like schools. The university that you go to is not necessarily, the name doesn't really mean that much. What matters is who is there. And so you have to look at who is actually at these different programs, read behind the lines, and look to see at who are the faculty at these different programs, see if you actually recognize them. Look really deep into, maybe their different CVs, for example. Maybe they have resumes so it's CV is a fancy name for CV, for resume in academia. And really just look at like their lines that they have, and if they're publishing in really good journals in your particular field. So in strategic management, are they publishing in strategic management journal? If it's finance, are they publishing in journal of finance? Those kind of things, right? So you're looking for those kind of cues in terms of who those individuals are, and just kind of get a sense of who those particular people are. And that's going to get you a better predictor of how good the program is, even if they have, different names and things like that. Because, lots of people call different programs all sorts of different names. It's just a name. And, it's really easy to change the name. It's hard to build a culture. It's hard to build a group of faculty that are productive, that are, it's a nice environment. There's no jerks there, all those kind of things. Like that part of it, that is really hard. Names, really easy to change. So just really sort of look into that in terms of when you see other names. Ultimately, I think to do a PhD in any particular field, and I would suggest this for anybody, it is really about having a calling to that particular field or doing that particular thing. So a calling is more of, kind of like a religious sort of thing, I guess. So really you're pulled towards that particular idea or doing those particular things because you're inherently interested, or that there's an external force pulling you towards that, right? Of investigating that stuff. And that's really what you're looking for. It's not for all these sort of things that you should be, or that most of us think about, right? So status. You'd get a little boost of status once you're done. When you're a PhD student, you've got no status at all, unfortunately. And that's just kind of the game. And that's what it is. Your income, maybe for some people, might go up. Actually, for a lot of people, it will go down. They have much better especially if you have a great degree already, you have an MBA, you have an undergrad that's really strong, your salary is probably going to go down, unfortunately, for a large group of people. So there's lots of different things that you should look at, and it's not sort of the things that you're wondering about. But the biggest thing is, are you actually pulled towards looking at those questions and investigating the things that you want to do, and that you're just inherently curious about the world? Well, then that's good to do those kind of things, right? It's very entrepreneurial, where you can actually do the things that you want to do and investigate the things that you want to do, and you drive that particular direction. So that's all I want to talk about with this in terms of why you might actually choose to do a PhD in strategic management. Hopefully this helped you out in terms of thinking through what it means and what it's all about. So give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel. I do appreciate it. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.